Hello there, my Sunbeams. It's me, Icarus, and this is Chapter 6 of And How Does That Make You Feel by Rosyredlipstick on AO3. If you have enjoyed this series, please go onto AO3 and give them the kudos and comments that they deserve. And now onto the last part of this fic. Come on, Will turned so he could weave his fingers through Nico's and pull them forward, the previous mood forgotten. The cookies need time to bake, and your unending stare will not hurry them. Nico's gaze snapped back to Will, amusement dancing in his eyes. Well, he drawled out, my gaze seems to make you all hot and bothered, so you can't blame me for trying. Will laughed and pulled Nico into the living room with him, a light red dusting his cheeks. They ended up sprawled on the couch together, and thanks to some careful manoeuvring on Nico's part, he ended up in mostly Will's lap. Neither of them seemed to mind very much. Low music was playing, something that Nico hadn't noticed before. It was some horribly sweet pop song that Will liked, just like all the other horrible music Will liked. Nico supposed it said something that Nico sort of loved horrible pop music now. He didn't try to think too hard into it. Will was watching Nico, waiting. "What's up?" he finally asked, his voice soft and hesitant. Nico didn't always respond well to direct questions, so he usually kept them sparse. Nico tensed before deflating a bit. "How do you always know?" "It's my job," Will told him, brushing Nico's hair over his shoulder. "And I'm excited to say, I know you." Nico was quiet for a long moment before leaning to Will's touch before speaking, and his voice was quick, as if he was afraid he would never get the words out. "Hades wrote to me." Nico swallowed, and he was glad he was facing away from Will. "Oh?" Will prompted, resting his chin on Nico's shoulder. "He wants to meet up with me. To apologise, he says." Nico ducked his head. "I'm not sure if I ever believe him." "You should do what you think is right. Meet him." Will wanted to tell him, "Forgive him. Please don't hold the hurtful grudge I know you want to have." "I don't want you to get hurt," he said instead, because it was the absolute truth, and he was Nico's kind of therapist, and he also was Nico's boyfriend. Will, selfishly, couldn't decide which one was more important. "I know, it's just, I feel so free, without all the bodyguards, the press, the evil." Nico sighed. "I'm not sure if I want to go back to that." "You won't have to," Will told him, holding him close. "You're an adult. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to when it comes to stuff like this." Will sighed. "I'm not saying you shouldn't have a relationship with your father, but I would suggest that maybe you don't go back to the relationship you had with him." Will gave the other boy a small smile and turned his chin so it was facing him. "Go to brunch. Talk it through. No one's going to make you move back in the manor or attend to any evil parties, whatever you did before." "There were galas," Nico corrected him, leaning his forehead on Will's. "I had to wear a tux." "Really? Evil galas?" Will thought about it, mostly about how nice Nico probably looked in a tux. "Sounds neat." Nico shrugged, and Will took his hand and held it. "I know you miss your father," Will told him, his voice as soft as his loose grip on Nico's hand. "I know you miss him. I really think you should respond, even if it's just to get closure. But I'll support whatever you do. You know that, right?" Nico nodded and waited a long moment before sighing. "I guess I'll text him or something," he muttered, but seemed to have no objection to the choice. Will admired him. "I'm glad. Your father seems to love you very much." Nico didn't respond to that, and they sat there in silence for a while. It was only until they were both startled out of their thoughts by the shrill oven alarm that they remembered the cookies. "Come on," Will smiled, and Nico took a second to admire how nice he looked. "Hayes will be here soon. Let's get those cookies out without eating most of them." Hours later, the night sky was dark and the air was clear with a chill. It had rained earlier, and the grass was slick and the pavement darkened. The disturbed sections of the peaceful scene were scarce and almost impossible to spy. Some examples, such as the slightly crushed grass blades leading up to the apartment building, could only be spotted by the trained eye. Others, such as the single muddy footprint imprinted on the sidewalk, were more obvious, but would be gone by the morning. Inside the apartment building, Nico had long since abandoned his messy boots and thick red jacket. His phone was nearby, but off. A mug of cider steamed, but remained unsipped. The only thing that seemed worthy or capable of Nico D'Angelo's attention at the moment was a thick, leather-bound book. The material was quality, though the aged leather seemed to be more of a factory than actual age. The boy flipped the pages carefully, but quickly, as he mentally devoured the book. Nico held the book carefully, his eyes only barely leaving the pages to glance up at Will, as the other boy shuffled in the room, a thick blanket wrapped around his bare shoulders. Will sprawled out next to him, the heat radiating off Nico, tempting and entrancing. "You found my diary?" he questioned, already knowing the answer. Nico took a moment, then to carefully press his thumb onto the paper where he was reading before flipping up his sharp gaze to meet Will's eyes. "Found?" he repeated in disbelief. "You say found as if it was lying round or resting on some bookshelf." He sighed for a long moment. No real frustration in the movement. "I had to break into your godforsaken office at 3 a.m. Will, I scared half the life out of some poor squirrel that had been sitting on a window ledge, and almost got in a fight with a raccoon that was hiding in the dumpster. And after that adventure, I had to hack past several security systems, all encrypted with various languages. Thanks for that, by the way. And a literal vault, for God's sake, Will. And then, after all that, around 3 or 4 hours of high mental straining, breaking in a fucking dollar store combination padlock." "It's a wonder how you got past the padlock," Will muttered into the couch. His hair stuck up in every direction, and his cheeks were red with warmth. "Really? That's what you take away from this? Not the fact I broke into your apartment to get your diary?" "It's a nice office," Will mused, curling closer into the other boy. "Did you say hello to Soren?" "Did I? Will, of course I said hello to Soren, but that's not the point." "You always seem to have a point," Will told him, his eyes sliding shut. "Why don't you come back to bed and we'll talk about it after this wonderful point I'm sure you'll have in the morning." Nico groaned, his grip tightening on the book quickly. "Just a few more minutes." "What part are you at?" Will smiled into the cushion, secretly pleased Nico was enjoying his word so much. "That time I broke in while you were in the shower." Will laughed. "And when I came out, you were already sprawled across my bed in a pair of my pajamas." He hummed under his breath. "I knew you would enjoy that part. I thought you would enjoy the detail about the maple syrup the best." "You knew? You knew? What do you mean? I can't—" "Never mind." Nico threw his hands in the air, the book dropping onto the cushions. "Never mind. You know what? It's bedtime." Nico stood, pulling Will with him. Will leaned sleepily onto Nico, pressing his cold nose onto the other boy's neck. Nico groaned, taking most of Will's weight. "You are so making me breakfast in the morning." Will hummed into Nico's neck. "Pancakes?" "Oh gods, yes," Nico agreed, dropping Will down in his bed before curling up next to him. "Banana flavouring?" "With chocolate," Will agreed, holding his arms open. "Now come here." Nico complied, pulling the blanket around him. "Hazel's coming for dinner," Nico muttered. "She likes you." Will grinned and pulled Nico closer to him. "I like her too. She's great. I loved her story about you in the Hawaiian shirt." Nico hummed pleasantly. "You will never speak of such story again." Will laughed, low and tired. "I will speak of such story again. Often. Passionately, with much gusto." Nico elbowed him, but it was too soft to cause any reaction. "Be quiet," Nico ordered him, his voice full of warm affection. "It's bedtime. Go to sleep." Will tightened his arms around the other boy, and Nico enjoyed the feeling of safety that came with the movement. The silence was warm, and only interrupted by the soft, occasional click of the ceiling fan. "Have sweet dreams, sugar lips," Nico muttered into his pillow, as his eyes fell shut. Will opened his eyes, and through the darkness could just make out the sharp, pale lines of Nico's cheekbones. Will pressed his lips to the back of his neck, inhaling the clean scent of Nico's peppermint shampoo, mixed with the faint traces of the cologne he had put on before Hazel arrived. Will supposed it wasn't fair how, after everything Will loved so much about the other man, he had the nerve to perpetually smell good. He also couldn't find it in him to care very much. When Will's eyes finally flooded closed for the night, Nico's breath had already evened out, and his snores had already begun. Hours later, while both were heavily asleep, Nico's arms would find their way around Will's waist, and the sheets would drag and tangle at their feet. Hours later, when the birds would start to sing, and Will, of course, would be the first to detangle himself from the bed, he would take a moment to drape a soft blanket, Will's favourite, across the other boy's bare back. Hours later, Nico would wake to a symphony of sizzling pancakes, cracking eggs, and the clashing of dishes. and he would muster a smile through the haze of early morning exhaustion. Even more hours later, when the fragrance of breakfast had long since faded, Hazel would knock on that front door, and would spend dinner hiding smiles in her sleeve through bites of her ravioli, and so many hours in the future, at the point where trying to measure the difference in time by hours is a bit ridiculous. Nico would bend at the knee and hold up all of his hope, all of his insecurities, and all his love to Will, as well as a little black box, and Will would choke on his emotions before choking on his answer and pulling Nico up into his arms. But none of that mattered right now. All that matters right now, as Will falls asleep entangled with the man he loved, was that it seemed that he had finally found his sweet dream. Okay, and finally the end of And How Does That Make You Feel by Rosyredlipstick. The notes at the end of this are, this is the 6th work in my first meeting Solangelo AU series. Follow me on Tumblr for short stories and weird ramblings, if that's your thing. It's rosyredlipstick.tumblr.com. My words were not wording today, as you could probably hear. And thank you so much, my Sunbeams 100 subscribers. This means so much to me, more than you could actually ever know. And I think I'm going to do a 100 subscriber special. And I have a fic that was planned to release in April, but it's actually one that I wrote myself, and it is completely unhinged, but I think it would be perfect for the occasion. Let me know what you think in there in the comments. Before you go, please go on AO3 and give Rosyredlipstick the kudos that they deserve, please. This is amazing story, and I can't thank them enough for giving them the blanket permission for me to use it. I loved reading the story. Well, enough said. Thank you so much for listening this far, and I hope you have a wonderful day or night.